Welcome to my channel. I'm Jonah MacTavish-Slaton, and today I want to talk about something that is very surprising that we found out a few years ago about the family genetics through DNA. My family has been very well versed on their cultural and historical identity from our ancestry from Ireland and Scotland. But we took a DNA test, or I took a DNA test, several years back, and incredibly, what we thought would be an R1B Irish haplogroup tended to shock us. As with other Slatons here in America, we came up with the haplogroup of I1-M253, which is a Nordic haplogroup, which originates out of Scandinavia. It spread throughout Scandinavia, down through the Judas Peninsula, which is now Denmark, into northern Germany and Friesland. So imagine our shock that we know that our family came from Ireland and Scotland, obviously married into a lot of families with those names such as the MacTavish, the O'Cours, the O'Hurleys, the MacDougals, the Campbells, and so forth throughout the last couple of hundred years. It was pretty amazing that we did not bear the Irish haplogroup, the Y haplogroup, that all sons inherit from their fathers. Instead, we inherit a Nordic haplogroup, I1, all the way down to branching down to A1890. Now, A1890, there's only a few people in the world outside of the Slatons that originated from the Carolinas have, and that's, I believe, 2 people in Denmark, 1 in Sweden, 1 in Germany, 1 in Scotland, 1 in Ireland, and 1 in England. So this prompted me to try to figure out exactly where how we came into Britain and Ireland roughly 1,000 or so years ago. So the journey takes us back to the Nordic Bronze Age. This is roughly around 15 to 1800 BC. In southern Sweden. This is an area now that's called West Gotland / Scania, so the southern tip of the Scandinavian peninsula, where you have modern day Sweden. At one point, Denmark also controlled this. But so you have this part of the Scandinavian peninsula coming down, and in West Gotland and Scania, through this area region, where these were the people called the Geats, or the Goots. This was the people of Beowulf. This is the people that probably the Goths, the Jutes, and even later the Angles may have even came from. They're a cousin group of the Swedes and the Danes, and also the Norwegians. So if you go back to probably the time around the Nordic Bronze Age, these people would all be collectively one genetic group, of that Nordic haplogroup I1, and they would all share the same language, the same culture, or the same religion. Incredibly, you go all the way down to into the Iron Age and into the Roman Age. These groups would still be very closely knitted and would separate themselves into petty kingdoms or chiefdoms. They would share the same genetics. Some of the genetics that would be involved in this I1 would be the original Scandinavian hunter-gatherer, this West meets East hunter-gatherer, with the original inhabitants, or the first people that came back to Scandinavia, and then this ancient Northern Eurasian group. And then the next genetics that would come into this pie, per se, or this mixture, would come from the battle axe culture, or maybe even before that, the pitted ware culture. And within this, you'd have this a Northern Eurasian group come in of the R1A, and would bring in those genetics. This is the time of the battle axe culture, or the boat battle axe culture, that would lead to the Nordic Bronze Age. Now, everyone that has the I1 is pretty much kin to everyone that is from the pitted ware culture to the battle axe culture, and even into the Nordic Bronze Age. And we're talking about, this is roughly 2100 to 1800 BC, that everyone in the world that has the I1 haplogroup, M253, are kin to the same ancestor that was found there in Scandinavia. So from this, we have our beginnings, our origin. And from there, there's a lot of hypothesis on how we would leave this area of southern Sweden. Did we come down into from West Gotland or Scania and come into Zealand with the Danes? Or did we come over into the Jutes in Jutland, or even with the Danes there? Did we head over into Norway, which seems to be maybe the best plausible answer, is that this group of Geats that were maybe mixed with Swedes, possibly Danes, ended up into Norway, short-lived because of the wars. There was a lot of chaos going on during the Roman age in Scandinavia. A lot of chaos was going on, and this would lead to many migration tribes that would come out of Scandinavia into continental Europe from the north. At the hypercenter of this would be these people that would be known as the Geats or the Guts. And they were trapped between the Swedes and the Danes, north and south of them, and then to their west would be the Norwegian tribes. Now, remember, these are all cousins, and they all speak probably almost the identical language at this time, and this is the Roman Iron Age. They're the same genetics, same culture, same dress, same hierarchy, same system of government and ruling, same religion, and like I already said, the same language. So we're coming out of the Roman Age, and then we end up having this probably pre-Vendel / Vendel age mix-up with the Geats there in Restgotland and Scania, which would be the east of Gotland and Sweden. And many of these people would flee into what is Jutland, which is the Danish peninsula now. Others would flee into Norway. And then from there, you would have individuals that would settle. Many would push on to the far reaches of Norway because the southern kingdoms, such as Vestland and other areas, were more aligned at times with the Danes. So these people would push on and integrate within Norwegian families, while other group would migrate over and integrate and become, probably part of the Judish kingdom. And then at its time, these individuals would leave. Well, we know the people on the Judish Peninsula, which is Denmark today, in southern Sweden, would come over into the British Isles, and particularly the Jutes went to a couple places. They went mainly to Kent, but they also had two other kingdoms, small petty kingdoms in southern Britain, while the Angles would come over and would settle the east coast from about central England all the way up into Scotland. Many people don't understand, don't think of this, but the Northumbrian kingdom of the Angles, Bernicia, was actually all the way up into Edinburgh. So these Angle Judish people from the Scandinavia, these Nordic people, were in Scotland as early as the mid to late 400s. So that's fascinating to know these Nordic people were here. We could go into different scenarios about who was Nordic and who wasn't, but we do know the Angles and the Jutes, when they came over, they brought Danes and Swedes and Geats. They brought these people with them along with Frisians. The one in particular, the Saxons, are more closely related to the Germanic tribes to the south. So the Saxons are really generally acknowledged as Nordics, such as the Angles and the Jutes. And we look at their culture and all their warfare and their history, and we can see they all came at one point from southern Sweden. But that's the Anglo-Saxon invasion of Britain, in particularly the west of Britain. Then you would have this other wave of people that would come in during the Viking Age. In particular interest with my DNA is how, there's how to end up in Scotland, the west of Scotland. And This was brought in mainly by Norwegian Vikings settling the Hebrides and the western coast of Scotland, and on down through the age of the Isles, the Kingdom of the Isles, which was ruled by a Norse king. Now, at a particular time, sometime in the late 800s, all the way to roughly 1004 A.D., when the last Dublin Kingdom of the Vikings ended. But anyways, from sometime late 800s to about 1004, so roughly 100+ year period, this area between England and Wales and Ireland and Scotland, we call it the Irish Sea, up into the Sea of the Hebrides. This area was mainly controlled by Norse. And you had the Norse Kingdom of Dublin, you had the Kingdom of Man, or the Kingdom of the Isles. You also had another petty kingdom that doesn't get a lot talked about, that was actually in the west of England, northern England, along with Danelaw. So, and then when you go up into Scotland, you would also have other small petty chiefdoms of Vikings throughout the coastline of western Scotland and the Hebrides. So into that is this DNA brought over, and this DNA brought over would land somewhere in on the west of Scotland, particularly the Isle of Skye area, maybe northern Argyll and the Hebrides. And this DNA from my family, which originated in southern Sweden, somewhere in West Götaland or Scandinavia, would make its way and transition over into over into Norway, or possibly even down into the Judas Peninsula, and would make its way over with the Danes. Nevertheless, this area would all be interconnected in the Irish Sea and the Sea of Hebrides by both the Danes and the Norwegians, and there's several different petty kingdoms. At one point, after marrying into several Scottish Gaelic families in Scotland, this family would lose its Norse identity and assimilate into this Scottish Gaelic culture, and would be more Scottish than Norse. And eventually they would continue to marry on and on and on, and then they became part of this warrior class of people that would have been around during the time of Summerland, when the last kingdom of the Isles, or the last king of the Isles, died, and Summerland defeated his son to become the Lord of the Isles. And then this would completely change everything after that, as the control of these areas, the Isles, would swing back to the Kingdom of Scotland. But this would be battle-hardened people, this mixture of Scottish Gaelic people that probably had some Pictish in their DNA, their genetics as well, were very battle-hardened, tough area to live in at this particular time. A seafaring people, just like the Norse that would come in. And so you would infuse these genetics and these fighting skills and this political system and this ferociousness, and you would have these Norse Gaelic mercenaries called Galaglass. And after being Galaglass probably for a century and a half or so, they would end up coming into the north of Ireland to fight with Edward the Bruce, where many of them settled. Afterwards, when Edward the Bruce was killed, and the battle for Ireland was lost against the Anglo-Normans, most of these Galaglass, these Norse Gaels from the western Scotland, would end up staying and serving other Irish Gaelic lords, in particular Donegal. So here we have it. We're in Sweden, during the Bronze Age. In Sweden, probably during the and we're talking about my Y haplogroup. So we're talking about, from my father's back. Now, along the way, many of Scots and Irish and Welsh and even German and Native Americans would be married in this line. And as you go back, the tree just gets larger and larger and larger. We're particularly not one genetic group. We're a group of many different peoples. But anyways, we're talking about this Y group that would spin out of, come out of this southern part of Scandinavia, and would gradually go either in two hypothesis, one over into Norway and down with the Norwegian Vikings in the Isles, or two even down in the Judas Peninsula and come over with the Danes perhaps. Whatever way, they ended up in the north of Scotland, and from there, after several centuries, would end up in the north of Ireland, and then on through down to Tipperary and Ballyslaton. The name was probably taken from Ballyslaton. They left because of, assumingly, probably political persecution or just trying to survive. And since an Irish name would not be particularly fond of, it might have been that they adopted the place name of where they were at. There was a lot of penal laws that forced a lot of the Irish to take English surnames or to anglicize their Irish names or to drop the O or the Mac. But at some point, these people would make their way into Tipperary, and then from Tipperary would make their way to the States. And, you know, the first one in the States was George Slaton, who settled in Carolina, fought in the Revolutionary War, was married to a Mary O'Bizzle. So the first children born in the States would have this Irish connection on both sides of their family. But that's it, you know. We're talking about this timeline from, you know, back to the pitted wearer culture, the battle axe culture, roughly around 2000 to 1800 BC, all the way through the Nordic Bronze Age, all the way through the Iron Age, living right there in southern Sweden, and then sometime probably between the Vendel Age and the Viking Age, would leave southern Scandinavia and make their way into Scotland, and then from Scotland into Ireland, and then from Ireland into America, over staying in each section, you know, centuries at a time. So, you know, imagine the shock when you do the do a DNA test and you would think that, okay, you're going to be the R1B Gaelic marker or Gallic marker, one or the other, Scotland or Ireland, and you turn out to be Nordic, so which was a big surprise. And I think what DNA studies shows us is that many clans even in Scotland have origins that are not Pictish or Scottish or Irish. They actually have a lot of clans that are Norman based, a lot of clans that are even Anglo-Saxon based from the Northumbria people that had came in well before Scotland was even thought of. And then you have the Vikings that would come in, especially in the West, in the Hebrides, where you would have these Norse Gaelic clans, which we knew of, but a lot of times we thought these Norse Gaelic clans were Gaelic Scottish lords marrying, you know, Norse women. But it actually, that did happen, but a lot of cases you had it the other way around, that these guys were thought to be Scottish at the time, but they were originally themselves Norse. And then here we go 100 years later, after being born to several, you know, mothers and grandmothers that were Scottish, and they assume the Scottish identity, then they would turn around and marry into a known Norse family, and they would figure that that's where their the Norse Gaelic part of their identity came from, which was not always the case, such as like with Somerled and some other famous, you know, clans from him like MacDonald, MacDougall, and so forth. So it's very interesting. So if you ever have a chance, do your haplogroup. It could shock you. You could think that you were German and end up being, you know, from, you know, Ireland, or you could think that you're, you know, Scottish or Irish, and your haplogroup come, in my sense, from Norway. Now, this was a long time ago, you know. So if you look at my genome, the study of modern genetics into my DNA, it's more what you would say what the average person in Scotland or Ireland would have today. And, you know, there is a little bit connecting to people in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, these Scandinavian people, but it's a very small amount and compared to much more massively connected to people of North Britain and Ireland than I am them. It's just that haplogroup will never change. It can only mutate on down through further generations. But it's pretty spectacular because, you know, you may think that, you know, your furthest back grandfather has always been, you know, this German guy, you know, because you had a German name and you were in Texas during the time where the German immigrants came in the 1830s and 40s. It ended up you were an Irishman that immigrated to New Orleans, that went up to find work and ended up living in a German area and assumed a German name. And that's actually happened. So pretty cool, fascinating stuff. You know, keep looking, keep researching, and you know, always be on the hunt and the adventure of understanding who you truly are.